I am a deacon. I've been a deacon for 2 years now, I guess, at Florence Boulevard Church of Christ here in town. I have come to realize that a deacon means a minister who doesn't get paid for it. There are some places that have education ministers. I am an education deacon. An education minister, I think, makes pretty good money. I make none. So I hadn't realized it before Jeremy asked me to speak about vocational ministry. I hadn't thought of myself in those terms, but that's what I am. A vocational minister. A vocational minister is somebody who doesn't do ministry for vocation. You would think that'd be a non-vocational minister, but we call it a vocational minister. Or we call it a deacon. So that's what I am, and that's what I'll be talking about. I am going to talk about my experience of vocational ministry, which will not be your experience if you choose to do vocational ministry not as your vocation. My experience will not be your experience, but I can't talk about your experience. I can only talk about mine. I will not talk about vocational ministry exhaustively or even representatively. It'll only be my experience. Hopefully some of the things I mention will stimulate your thinking and help you to think about what kind of ministry you want to have. Maybe you definitely don't want one like mine, or maybe you will want some of the things and not others. One of the things that will be different, probably, maybe, is that I don't preach every Sunday. I usually think of a vocational minister as somebody who preaches every Sunday and doesn't get paid for it. But I hardly ever preach. So that might be one of the things that is different. Maybe if you choose to become a vocational minister, you will be that type that goes to Montana or someplace where the church is not very strong, where there are 50 people who can't afford to pay you a full-time salary, and they will want you to preach every Sunday for them. But that's, again, not the kind of thing I do. As I say, I'm a deacon. We have a preacher, and so I don't have to preach. We have a youth minister, so I don't have to do those types of things either. So if we need somebody to fill in for the preacher, we already pay somebody to fill in for the preacher, as it were. So I'm not even the guy second on the list. You know, I'm on down the list as far as fill-ins. So that is definitely not the kind of thing I do. The scripture reading is from Deuteronomy 25. I don't know if you were able immediately to relate it to what we're talking about today, or maybe it'll take a while. In the context of different laws, Paul just throws out randomly, apparently, this idea that you don't muzzle an ox while it's threshing. Did I say Paul? Deuteronomy, Moses, throws out randomly, apparently, this idea that you don't muzzle an ox while it's threshing. It seems to not fit so well in the context in which it appears in Deuteronomy 25, but Paul picks up on that and says, God is not concerned about oxen, is he? Is he not all, or is it not written altogether for our sakes? Yes, for our sakes it is written. For the plowman ought to plow in hope, and the thresher to thresh in hope of sharing in the crops. But Paul also knew that sometimes it was an advantage not to take full advantage of the things you could, to forego some of those benefits. And so he tells the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 9 that he doesn't want their money, and he can do very well on his own. Well, that's not exactly the reason I am a vocational minister, maybe not the same reason as Paul. I'm a vocational minister, I suppose, because nobody's offered me a job. Nobody said, we're willing to pay you to come do the same thing you do at Florence Boulevard. Maybe that'll happen someday, but not that I'm looking for that. One of the advantages, and I guess this is the part where I contradict everything Corey said a week ago, but not really. This is, a week ago he did what paid ministry is like, so I'm doing what unpaid ministry is like. One of the, well, I guess I might say just about all of the advantages of vocational ministry are the disadvantages of paid ministry, just looked at in a different way. So one of the things I think about is that I am happy with is the time commitment involved in vocational ministry is not so great as the time commitment involved in paid ministry. When you're paid to be a minister, you're expected to be at all the functions and be at every funeral and be there every Sunday and Wednesday, twice on Sunday usually. I'm not expected to do those types of things. So if I have a family commitment, I can feel free to honor that family commitment without feeling like, well, I have to really hold church life and family life in balance and maybe even give church life a bit more of the balance than I would like sometimes. So the time commitment involved for me makes vocational ministry an advantage. I have a job at Heritage that takes some time. I have 3 kids and a wife that takes some time. And then there's other things I'd like to do that take time. So I'm heavily involved in church work, but I don't feel the pressure to be. Some ministers don't feel the pressure to be at everything, and that's great, but some ministers do, and some elders expect them to be at everything. My elders don't expect me to be at everything. They don't pay me to be at everything. I don't have the pressure to produce lessons, 3-4 lessons a week, every single week. I don't know what I would do if I had pressure like that on me to produce all the time. There are times that I am sitting listening to a preacher and an idea pops into my head about, well, that'd make a great sermon or a great Bible class, and I can write that down. But I am free to not have to think of these ideas all the time on a schedule. Like, an idea better come to me at Thursday at 9 o'clock, or else I'm, I can have these ideas as the ideas pop into my head. I don't have the pressure that paid ministry brings to have lessons ready all the time. My family's not under a microscope. I don't know what it's like being a paid minister. The last time I got paid for doing ministry was about 10 years ago at the Fanger Church of Christ in Fanger, Tennessee, spelled F-I-N, pronounced Fanger. And I was the college-age minister, and there I didn't get paid to preach either. I just got paid to teach Bible classes, basically, to college people. I think I got paid $100 a week, so not exactly full-time. But that was the last time I got paid for being a minister, 10 years ago. So I don't know exactly what it's like to have your family join you in ministry at a church, but I think you could say that the family is under a microscope more so than other members of the congregation. Every time my kids act up, it's not that big of a deal. Maybe some ministers feel that it's a real big deal when their kids do that. My wife is not expected to be a certain way a minister's wife. She's just expected to be Jody. I like that. I like the pressure not being on her. And so that's an advantage, I would say, of non-paid ministry as well. And then the other thing that is really a big thing is that, and you might classify all these things under this, money just complicates relationships in a lot of ways. Whatever relationship, if you're a millionaire looking for your next wife, there's probably always that concern. Maybe it's not a concern, maybe you go for it. This is a good advantage to have. But there's always the concern that, is this woman interested in me for love or for money? Or vice versa, I suppose. It's a woman millionaire can say the same thing. My relationship to Florence Boulevard Church of Christ is not complicated by money. If I were paid, I don't know what it would be like. Am I going to this funeral? Some people could look at it because it's my job to, or because I genuinely care about this person. who has had a death in the family? Am I doing this kind act for somebody because the elders pay me to do that kind of thing? That's my job to do that? Or am I doing that because I'm a servant of Christ and that's what he expects me to do? You won't have that people questioning your motives all the time, but I think probably if you're paid to do ministry, some people will wonder, do you really care about me, or is this just because you're being paid to do it? Well, I don't know if people question my motives or not, but they don't question whether or not I'm doing it because I get paid, because I don't get paid, so I don't have to worry about that aspect of it. So when I go to a funeral, nobody's wondering whether I'm there because it's my job, because it's not, right? Except as a servant of Christ. So in a lot of ways, money complicates things. Some preachers do become preachers because it pays well. Now, I don't think you could have said that 50 years ago, but these days, preaching, you make more money than I make. There are a lot of preachers that make pretty good money. And so there are some people that can become preachers and do become preachers because it's lucrative. That's one thing I have dealt with on the mission field. We have paid certain preachers in foreign countries, and they make a lot more money than, well, being jobless, which most of the people around them are jobless. And so, you know, you always wonder, is that guy, is he committed to Christ and serving Christ, or is he committed to a paycheck? Well, I've dealt with that from personal experience. Some people in America become preachers because they're paid to. Money complicates relationships. When you have that money involved, it just does. And I have no doubt that everyone in here is sincere and honest and wanting to serve Christ. Probably wouldn't come to this school or be affiliated with the school unless that were the case. But you might be lumped in people's minds with other people who do look for a paycheck. And so, not that your motives are wrong, but some people might misconstrue you. So you just have to be aware of that and realize money sometimes can cloud their judgment about why you do what you do. It's possible that the fact that you get a paycheck from a church might diffuse some of the effectiveness of your ministry. And I've sort of mentioned that already, but not in those terms. Why are you doing what you're doing? And just because you are involved in this aspect of the church work, and this aspect of the church work, and this aspect of the church work, doesn't mean I need to be. After all, you get paid to do those types of things. I don't get paid. You know, I'm speaking in the voice of the common churchman here. I don't get paid, so you do that because we pay you to do that, and I can just sit on the pew or sit on my couch, and I don't have to be involved like you're involved. Whereas you might be trying to model what Christianity is like for everyone around, they might not perceive it as that. You're just doing it because you get paid, and I don't have to follow your model, right? So I feel like, well, when I get involved in various things at church, I don't have that complication in the way of, you know, like Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ, right? Not that I'm a very good imitation of Christ, but when I try to imitate Christ, I don't have that particular complication cloud people's opinions of why I am doing what I'm doing. So that's an advantage of vocational ministry. And then another one is that has to do with money complicating things is I have a lot of job security in my deaconship because you know, Ted said yesterday that you're one business meeting away from being fired. Well, I suppose they could release me of my deaconship, but it's not going to hurt my checkbook, and I'm not going to move towns because of it. I'm going to raise my kids in Florence, Alabama, right here. I'm not going to move, and I am released from any concern about having to find a ministry job because I don't have a ministry job. I don't get paid for it. So I have a lot of job security in my church life, and you might seek that as well. I don't know. So basically, I am, as a vocational minister, I am free. I'm free to serve Christ without complication that money brings. I'm free to suggest things to the elders or other people, or critique maybe certain things that are going on at church without feeling threatened myself, or that I need to walk on eggshells in order to protect myself. I am free to not have to know everything about the Bible. I haven't mentioned that before, but I view that as a great freedom that ministers that are paid for it and preachers that are paid for it don't always have. You have to be ready for questions from all kinds of different people at all kinds of different stages of their life, and you need an answer right now, and you need to know what you think about every part of the Bible. And when the elders say, this Sunday you need to preach on this, and you haven't thought about that at all, you have to prepare something now, and you have like 3 days to figure out what you think about this particular issue. I am free to allow myself to have years to think about issues without having to come up with something right now. And I value that maybe more than anything else. When I came out of my undergraduate education, and I had a Bible degree when I was 22 years old or something, I knew at that time I do not want to preach full time because there's a whole lot of things I still need to study. And when I went to Hebrew Union and I studied, I still didn't want to preach full time because I still felt like, boy, I just don't know a whole lot. And it's just now, I'm 32 years old now, and I feel like now I know some things about the Bible that I feel like would be valuable to share with people, but boy, it's taken me a long time to get there. And to be able not only know some things about the Bible, but how to bring them into the 21st century context. And if I had to do that 10 years ago, I would have been really bad at it. I didn't have that pressure. I could allow things to percolate in my mind, and it's been very valuable for me to have that freedom of not having to know everything about the Bible right now, but allow myself to study and come to those things. Jeremy asked me to talk about pros and cons. I've talked a lot about pros. Let me just list some cons, and the cons will be the pros of paid ministry, so it shouldn't be that hard to figure out. First of all, I don't get paid for it. You know, that's a pro, but it's also a con. I could use some more money. You know, it wouldn't be too bad to be paid for certain things that I do. Some people might see it as a con that as a vocational minister, you're not in the spotlight all the time. Some people, you know, like to be in the spotlight. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but they like people to know to come to them for problems, and they be up in front of people and be leaders all the time. Some of you, I'm sure, enjoy that aspect of paid ministry. And so the contrast to that is people don't necessarily turn to me for help. You know, we have a guy that gets paid for that, and so they turn to him. I wouldn't mind so much if people thought of me as a good Christian example that they could turn to when they have problems. I would like that, but a lot of times people just don't think of that. And so, in a way, that I'm not able to make full use of myself as a servant of Christ because people just don't think to come to me. You have to put yourself more out there and let people know that. And then I guess one of the biggest disadvantages for me of not being paid to preach is that I don't get to preach. I have come to enjoy it quite a bit. I get to teach Bible classes because that's what I do. I am the deacon over education at Florence Boulevard, but we've got a guy that is paid to preach, and we've got a youth minister that's paid to fill in for him when he's away. And so, like I say, I'm number 3, 4, 5 down the line. I mean, we've also got a guy who used to be a full-time preacher at our congregation, and we've got several people who are very much experienced at it. So I don't get to preach that often. Mostly when Philip gets a call from a church and can't find anybody else, he'll ask me to go do it. And so, you know, a few times a year. Well, I enjoy preaching, and so that is a disadvantage for me. Now, that won't be a disadvantage necessarily for you if you become a vocational minister, because your vocational ministry may be preaching full-time for a church and not getting paid for it. But for where I am, and what I do, that is somewhat of a disadvantage. Altogether, I have enjoyed and profited very much from my vocational ministry, from being a deacon, and before that, not being a deacon, but still working with churches in different contexts. And you might find that that's the right thing for you to do as well. You might find that that's the thing you have to do because the church just can't pay you because of where you live or what church you're involved in. Paul said, the plowman ought to plow in hope and the thresher to thresh in hope of sharing in the rewards, and yet Paul himself, in certain contexts, chose not to take advantage of that which Christ had ordained for preachers of the gospel. You might find that that fits you as well, and maybe some of my experiences as a vocational ministry will bless you as you think about what kind of ministry you want to have. Thank you for your attention.